the 4201 Schools Association, Dr. Bernadette Kappen, co-chair, and the Coalition of Special Act Schools, Stephen Bovich, vice president. The 853 School Coalition is not testifying at this hearing. So they've been removed from the panel. So it is we have the two panelists here. So if you can begin, Dr. Kappen.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to present on behalf of the 4201 Schools Association. And we'll start off by thanking the legislature and the executive for all the support they give us all the time. As you know, in the governor's budget, we were level funded this year, and we were appreciative of that. In looking at what we need going forward, looking at the foundation aid that will be going to the school districts and other monies for other special ed, we would be respectfully asking for a 5.8% increase. I would say, just so you know, our schools were open during the pandemic. We met our COVID needs for the students, and the staff were there every day to help the students. So I think in order to continue in that vein, we definitely need that kind of support to be able to grow our programs and meet the needs of the children and their families. The executive budget also included another $30 million for the capital grant program, and we're extremely appreciative of that. And I just have to let you know how important that is. So many schools are struggling. One of our schools right now is really in a desperate situation for a boiler. So these monies are really needed for the future. We also asked for approval for a fiscal reserve fund that we might be able to use for emergencies, planning, and also for adapting to the needs of the students. Certainly the extra support and the fiscal reserve would help us with unmet needs. We currently know that there are unmet needs for children that are deafblind that need interveners in the schools, as well as children that are blind and children that are deaf that are medically fragile, that need additional services in order to participate in school. And this is truly an unmet need, that the 4201 schools, we feel we can meet those needs if there was adequate funding for the schools who could support that. We also are asking for your support with the workforce investment. Our kids are appropriately meeting their needs because of the wonderful teachers that we have. We're in direct competition with the local school districts, and we often lose our teachers because our salaries are so much lower. So we would be asking for $30 million over a 3-year period of time to have some equity in the salaries for our staff. And finally, continued support for reliable transportation. And I know that many of you have supported us in the past 2 years in making sure that the DOE has provided transportation for the students. The problem being that sometimes they want us to follow their schedule rather than ours. So we hope that that can happen. And just a quick closing, I always like to leave you with a quote. This is from Maddie Stepanek, a 13-year-old child that had muscular dystrophy. And he says, "Unity is strength. When there is teamwork and collaboration, wonderful things can be achieved." And that's what I see with the 4201 Association, with the legislature, and with the schools, that we work together to meet the needs of the students. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Stefan?
Hi, good evening. First of all, I just want to thank the Senate and the Assembly for including the ability for our schools to have a fiscal reserve fund in last year's budget. Giving us the ability to now have a level of fiscal security going forward is going to make a huge difference. So thank you again. I'd also like to thank Governor Hochul for including the 11% growth rate in tuition for special education providers in this year's budget. However, I did want to make the legislator aware that currently, due to rate setting methodology, no special education provider will see their growth rate the growth rate in tuition at the beginning of the next fiscal year, and very few will see the growth rate at all. As a matter of fact, no special education provider has received the 4% promised in this year's budget because as of today, the rate setting methodology for the current fiscal year has not been released. Annually, the State Education Department proposes to the Division of Budget the inclusion of an interim plus rate which would ensure that approved growth rates are being applied to tuition rates at the beginning of the fiscal year. Every year, this is rejected, and schools do not receive the funds they desperately need that have already been approved in the budget. There are schools that have not received any growth, speaking for special acts, any growth dating back to 2011 because of complications with the rate reconciliation process. With the governor ready to invest $240 million into special education programs next year, I am asking that there is an assurance that all providers receive their funds by having the 11% tuition growth automatically added to their tuition rate on July 1st. Without this being put in place, many of the schools that serve the state's neediest and most vulnerable students will not see any additional funds next year. If $240 million is approved, $240 million should be dispersed. Please help stop technicalities from keeping funds from these schools, which directly affect the services we could provide our students. I also must ask that the 18.42% state share for CSE placements outside of New York City not be eliminated as proposed by the governor. The school districts rely on these funds to send their neediest students to our programs. The enrollment in our programs over the past 2 years, when the state share was temporarily eliminated, has dropped. Students are getting to our programs later, which delays getting them the intensive services that they need. Please do not include the governor's proposal in your final budget. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, and thank you both for staying within our time limits. We start with the chair of the Assembly's Education Committee, Assemblyman Benedetto.
Thank you very much, Chairwoman Weinstein. Listen, we made an attempt this year to get a bill passed. It was vetoed. But if nothing else, we have raised a dialogue, a very important dialogue here, that we seem to have a commitment from this governor to work things out. And for the first time since I've been around, I see hope coming down the tunnel, if you want to talk it. So that's all I'm going to say on this. I will continue to work on solutions to having a funding stream that's equitable and fair to everybody. And like I said, I'm glad we've begun the dialogue. Good luck, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Shelley Mayer.
Thanks, and it's a pleasure to see you, Dr. Kappen, and to see you, Mr. Viovich. And I agree with my colleague here. We moved the ball down the field, or whatever the sports analogy is, last year, but we're not quite there yet. 2 questions for each of you. First place, on the special act issue, that you did not see the 4%, which was already approved theoretically by DOB, but you used the words, it was not released. Is that true for all the special acts, that none of you have seen the 4%, notwithstanding the additional 7%, which is great, but you haven't seen anything? You have seen no rate increase?
No, and that's not only for special acts, it's probably all special education providers, because the rate setting methodology hasn't been released for this year yet. So and the issue that brings is we might get that money in April or May for the ones who do get a rate. And then if we don't spend all that money by June, then the money goes away. And it really, trying to be fiscally responsible for our district, I'm not spending that money until we know that we're going to get that money. So it really does cause an issue.
Yes, okay. Second thing is the reduction in referrals to your school and others. You're suggesting in your testimony is somewhat related to the this shifting of the state share back to the municipalities. And I think a lot of your students come from the city of New York. Is it your experience that the city of New York referred fewer students to your school, notwithstanding what they might need individually, because of their having to pick up a greater percentage of the cost?
Well, I could say a lot of our students in my district are residential. We do have a small share of day students, and we're down probably about 15% in our day student population. So, and that seems across the board where I can't say that the hit is crippling, but it's definitely noticeable.
Okay, but you're suggesting that that hit is in part due to this change in reimbursement obligations.
That's yes. That's what we've been told by other districts, that it's at least a factor when they're making the decision.
Okay, and then Dr. Kappen, I very much appreciate your note about the incremental salary increase that's needed for your schools. And I know, having been to your school and seen it firsthand, you're great teachers. What's the approximate difference in salary between someone that you hire for one of your classes and what they would get in the New York City public schools?
I think it varies on the salary scale between entry and exit, but we know what happens in the past. You could walk out of our school and someone could make $15,000 to $20,000 more than we pay them. And they have to leave for certain life circumstances. I can think of a really wonderful teacher we had here that got divorced. She was on her own. And she's someone who's continued to be connected to us. And even when we have activities here, she comes. But she had to make that decision for herself.
Yes, understood, and something we actually have to address. But thank you very much, both of you, and thank you for your work with these kids that we all care deeply about.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Senator Mayor.
We go to Assemblyman Ra.
Thank you, Chair. Dr. Kappen, great to see you as always.
Thanks.
And, good to see you, Mr. Biovich. It's kind of cool for me. Me and Mr. Biovich go way back to our youth, so it's cool to see you on here. Thanks for being with us.
You too.
Right.
So earlier during the State Education Department's presentation, they made that exact point with regard to the reconciliation process and the fact that getting those funds later on are, it's going to be a challenge to spend them, and obviously that compounds a problem. And they suggested that they have a proposal to potentially kind of put the reconciliation process aside for at least this year, but potentially for 5 years, while we finally actually fix the structural problem. I assume that would be something that your association would be supportive of?
Yes, 100%. They've talked to us about how it would be a 5-year time period instead of 1 year, and that would be definitely helpful for us.
Great, thank you. And Dr. Kappen, you stated it well. Some of the continuing issues, and certainly I remain very supportive of getting you guys parity, just like the 853s and the special acts with the increases that are given to our public schools. I had an opportunity earlier today to do a virtual meeting with the new president from Viscardi and a student named Hunter, who's a senior who is planning to go into mechanical engineering. Just always great to hear about the student experiences at the 4201 schools. But one of the main points they were making to me is exactly what you concluded with, which is staff retention, and if there's not that increase in resources, the inability to be on par with surrounding educational institutions. But through this time, has that been exacerbated by the pandemic, or have you guys been kind of? I know you said students have been in, so have you been stable, or has it gone up or down in terms of losing staff?
We've lost a few people really related to the mandates for the vaccine. Few folks that chose not to be vaccinated, but we've been fairly stable. I think the real plus at our schools, the people who work with us, they love the children and they go above and beyond what's needed. And that's wonderful, but they should also be compensated for that. I think that's what happens, that they stay on, and then like this woman I was mentioning, maybe something occurs in their life and they have to move. But we have wonderful people that work with the children, and that's why they're successful.
Yeah, you absolutely do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Sue Serino.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Dr. Kappen and Mr. Viovich for being here today. You know, your teachers do God's work. And I have to tell you, I was on the phone with the parent today, and Mr. Viovich, you spoke about this, the CSE placements. And if they go away, like, I don't know what some of these parents will do. So it's just devastating.
Yeah, I'll say I probably stated it when, you know, Senator Mayor, but the more, maybe my district was only 10 to 15%, but there's other districts that are hitting, that it's hitting a lot more, and they know a lot more of their census is a lot further down, and the CSEs are telling them that it's, you know, because of, you know, that of the cost share going away.
We definitely need that program. So we will advocate for it too. But I just had a question for you, because in addition to, you know, salaries, of course, you know, it's always about the money. What else can we do, like, that could help recruit and retain teachers? Are there other things that you can suggest to us that maybe we're not doing?
I was thinking in the governor's state of the state, she talked about, you know, the retention and recruitment and working with paraprofessionals. I do think that that's one way to really help there. Again, we have people that have worked with us for a number of years that are paraprofessionals. And I think if we can try to encourage folks to move ahead in those areas would be helpful. And again, I think for the colleges and the universities to keep these programs, this is not necessarily a New York State problem, because we're fortunate here in the area of blindness that there is Dominican College and Hunter College that provides teacher prep. But across the country, this has been a huge issue for organizations that are looking for staff, that the colleges and the universities don't provide the programs because they feel there aren't enough children to be served. And this is something, there are a group of us that are working on this right now. It's called the Cogswell-Macy Act. And one of the areas there is looking at getting the proper child count by state and by nation, because we know that there are many ways that children are being counted and we're not having the proper count. So if you can't show a university or a state that there are these many children that are deaf, blind, then you're not going to have universities serving them. So that's one issue. I think the other is also reciprocity with the states, that if you live in Pennsylvania and you move to New York and you are fully certified to be a teacher of the blind and visually impaired, you shouldn't have to take all these classes over again and pay huge amounts of money for these tests, that people just don't want to do that. And I think that's a barrier as well.
Well, Dr. Kappen, that was some great points. I'm sorry, Mr. Viovich.
I just to add to her point, just a specific story. We have a teacher, a substitute teacher right now who's certified to teach special education in Connecticut, and she's doing great with our students. We can't right now, she's not able to get her New York certification, and we're not going to be able to continue her next year because she's not properly certified. And it's just a shame. Like I said, there's not a better way for reciprocity.
Thank you. The minister up.
Okay, thank you very much, both of you. Thank you.
Thank you. We go to Assemblywoman New.
Thank you so much for taking the time today. And, you know, I used to actually volunteer in the Vancouver Deaf School when I was in high school. And yep, and I'm fluent in sign language, but I wanted to say thank you so much for all of your work first and foremost. But I know that working in some of the classrooms that I did, that a lot of the important teaching goes on with smaller class sizes. I was just wondering what the effects of the current levels of funding have been, you know, and you know, I know that there was testimony that it was insufficient. So wanted to see like what effects it had on class size and the quality of care for so many of the students.
For our students in the 4201 Association, and I can speak directly for the Institute, we have a class size that's determined by the state of New York. It could be that you'd have 6 children, 1 teacher, 1 aide. Some classes may be 12 children, a teacher, and 4 aides. I know in some of the special needs classes in other schools. So we've been able to maintain that. I mean, the funding hasn't had us change that because it's a requirement that we would do that.
So what has the funding then changed for the students? Because there was testimony that there was insufficient funding. So what was the biggest changes then?
I think the funding definitely through COVID would be extra expenses that we had in order to open our schools. I could say for our situation, you know, they talk about everyone should be 6 feet in the hall. Well, that's fine if you can see, but if you have no vision, so we had to figure out, what are you going to do? So we had to run a very thin wire down the center of the hall, cover it with floor tape, so that when the child's cane hit it, they knew that they had to move to the wall. Working on, you know, just the whole cleaning. I mean, we had to have additional people for cleaning. Our kids touch everything. That's part of their life.
Right.
So at 12 o'clock every day, we had to have someone wipe down the walls, wipe down. So that helps. And I think sometimes we can't maybe attract the best person you would want because of some of those salary types of issues. And definitely the funding I mentioned before, there are things that the children need. As I mentioned earlier, we know there are a number of children that are deaf and blind that are in one of our schools, and it goes up to the 8th grade. They need then services for high school type of activity.
That's right.
They would like to blend together, these two schools working on that. But in order to have a quality education for those children, they need to have an intervener. And this is something other than an interpreter. The intervener is someone who's bringing that child into the environment so that they're knowing what's happening. If I were deafblind, for example, and I had an intervener, the intervener would be explaining to me everything that we're seeing on the screen here so that I know what's happening. Letting me know if someone is laughing or if, you know, something's happening in the room.
Right.
And there are many children that have blindness or deafness that have other disabilities that require medical intervention. So some of those children maybe need a nurse to be able to monitor that. And for the 4201 group, there has not been funding in their certificate of approval to allow them to do that. So those are some of the things generically for our association that could really help the schools, help the state service these children, because we do have the skills and the knowledge to be able to provide these things.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you. We go back to the Senate now.
Thank you. Senator Sean Ryan.
Thank you. Thanks for your testimonies today. And, Dr. Kappen, thanks for your hard work. I represent the area where St. Mary's School for the Deaf is. And I do a lot of work with Mike Kelly and his crew. And I visited several times during COVID, and I was very impressed with all the steps being taken in, very challenging environment to keep the kids coming into school, to keep everyone active, and engaged, but also to keep a super high level of academic learning going on at St. Mary's. So just want to, give a shout out to the good work that you do. And if you have anything you need to reach out to me on, please do.
Great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And we have Assemblywoman Joanne Simon.
Thank you. And thank you all for your testimony and for staying with us this long. I appreciated your testimony and the issues you raised with regard to the needs for this population. One of the real challenges in the field is that there are not a high incidence population. That is a challenge for higher education and training. It actually puts a little bit more pressure on the need for paraprofessionals to provide some of those services. I have sort of adopted the St. Francis de Sales School for the Deaf, as you may have heard, who really has tremendous physical plant needs, including their auditorium, which I was focusing on until the boiler went. And so I appreciate very much your advocacy for getting some funding for them. And I'd be happy to continue to work with you on that in any way that I can.
All right, thank you so much.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you all for you both for being here with us. We appreciate it and appreciate all the good work that you do, your organizations do.